We grew up in a household of five siblings, and Olivia being the oldest, me being the second oldest. Olivia was a beautiful person, inside and out. She was just very loving and caring. We're less than a year apart, so when I graduated, I moved out of my mom's house and moved with Olivia and her husband. My sister wanted to bring me under her wing, basically show me how to find a job.
I would always call her Fabulous Olivia. So this is probably one of those moments. She got the shades on, the drink, got her nails done, and the swimsuit. So this was just Olivia being fabulous. I know she was my sister-in-law, but I always said she was my sister because we talked about everything.
Olivia went into the tax business where she became very successful.
She was just always into something that was business-oriented.
This is when Olivia first became a mom. This is my sister, Courtney. This is Olivia. This is my mother when she had short hair. And this is Ariel.
Mom looks so young. She looks so young. It was pretty cool growing up. We used to go camping a lot, going swimming, climbing trees and stuff like that. She always made sure that we had everything. Basically a kid's like fantasy.
The divorce with her and Al was very upsetting to her, very disappointing. I feel like it also made her insecure in areas. And she was still just trying to make sure that her and the girls were good.
She really had to start over. She definitely did want to meet someone new. She wanted to get that family aspect back.
She seemed reluctant, to kind of move forward. But, I told her, I say, hey, you got to put yourself out there, You need to date, have fun again.
I knew that she wanted to find someone that was actually going to love her and just be all for her.
When I first heard the news that Olivia had met someone, I welcomed it because I want to see her happy.
She always talked about how cute he was and he has a good job.
He worked for the state of Texas as a prison guard. You would think that as a prison guard, they would be some type of protector for their families, for sure. As long as I can remember, as a kid growing up, we used to have football Sundays where on a Sunday you come together, you come at somebody's house, and there's a lot of good food to eat and there's a lot of good football to watch.
Football Sundays at my in-laws. I had never seen anything like it until I married into this family. We would go straight after church and stay there until like 10 o'clock, sometimes later. Everybody will still be there, be a packed house.
Just a lot of good family time and got a lot of good family fun, and Olivia was the centerpiece of all of that.
First time I met Chris, I remember Miss Anita offering him, which is my mother-in-law, offering him some food. Olivia was sitting next to him, and he said, yeah, you can go fix me something to eat. He told Olivia to go and fix the food. And I just kind of brushed it off. I said, well, maybe he's just one of those guys, very old school.
The first time I met Christopher, his whole dynamic was just off to me. When you talk to him, he comes off as arrogant. He is a know-it-all. And he used to tell me all the time, like, oh, I'm gonna marry your mom and all this stuff. And yeah, I would be like, no, you're not. Like, no, you're not. And I would run and tell my mom, like, no, you're not gonna marry this man. Please don't marry this man.
Early on in their relationship, Olivia and Christopher Jones had went out to a local restaurant in Beaumont, Texas one night. There was a young lady that Christopher Jones had been dating before. He got upset and started an altercation with Olivia.
We just happened to be there, and I guess this was a first date for them. And then we see these girls just jumping Olivia. It was 3 of them, and she was by herself. And one took off her shoe and was hitting Olivia in the head with it. You had one holding her, and the other one was just kind of fighting. Chris, and this is something I'll never forget, is not doing anything. I remember him laughing with his 2 friends.
At the time, the police was called, and of course, that's when Christopher Jones really tucks his tail and runs.
And I just remember Olivia getting in her Suburban at the time, and she was blood and was red and was crying a whole lot. And I remember trying to tell her, Olivia, calm down. And she was like, no, I want to go home. After the fight happened, I did contact Olivia. I said, you need to press charges.
But Chris told her to not file a police report because he was working at the prison at that time, so he didn't want it to come back on him. I never had a good feeling from Chris, never. But she didn't see that.
Myself, my wife, and my kids, and Olivia and her children were at a local park here in Beaumont, Texas. We had been at the park playing and catching up. Noticed that my sister's phone kept ringing, but she would never answer it. And it would ring back to back to back, basically, and she would never pick up the phone. Olivia and her kids had got into her car, and all of a sudden we see a truck kind of fly into the parking lot.
And I was like, well, who is this? And then I see Chris jump out the truck, leave his door open, and I see him punching her glass window. Like, he kept punching it, and at this point, Josh, he sees what's going on.
When I seen him bamming on the window, I immediately started running up to the situation with my wife grabbing me, trying to hold me back.
And I just remember pulling my husband's shirt because I'm like, we got the kids right here, and I'm telling the kids, y'all stay right there. And then at the same time, I'm on the phone with 911. And I see Olivia crying and screaming, please stop, Chris, please stop.
I heard my Aunt Brittany say, I'm gonna call 911, I'm calling 911 right now. And that's when he jumped in his truck and he sped off. And I remember him speeding off because he turned the corner so fast it looked like the truck was gonna flip.
And at this point, my kids are hysterical. And I looked over and Yalia and Ariel weren't crying. When I noticed that, I instantly said, oh, they've seen this before.
When I got up to the vehicle and Olivia was crying in the seat, and at that point, that's when Olivia shut down. And she didn't want to talk about it.
After that altercation, it did change our relationship with Olivia. She stopped talking to us for about a year.
Looking back at it, I should have pressed it more. He isolated her, made her feel like the only people that was there for her was his side of the family.
They didn't try to justify it. They just said that they were going to counseling, that he was getting better, and he would basically never do it again. Turn around. Ooh!
I believe when Olivia cut us off around that time, she was in love with Chris. She was embarrassed by what he had done. And I think she wanted everyone to believe that their relationship was good. They were in a good space. From the conversations we had with my mother-in-law, the family, you know, just thought Chris was just this really good guy. But me and Josh, my husband, we knew the truth, and we knew he had a dark side.
Lily, I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna protect you with my life. There's only one way I can do it. You gotta be my wife.
Come on. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Come on, baby. Come on. Say yes.
I just remember seeing on social media that he proposed to her and they got engaged.
When she told us, I didn't have no words.
I think she considered, you know, this will make sure my girls are taken care of.
I didn't want him to be my stepdad, and I didn't want him in my life.
Olivia told me about Ariel having her reservations. And like I told her, you have to listen to your child. But she felt like it was because Ariel didn't want to see her move on with someone besides her dad.
As long as he made it seem like he was changing, that he was gonna make everything right, then she was gonna stick beside him. The Beauty and the Beast, but without the beast changing.
Deep down in my heart, I was very confused. I was wondering, what is it about this man that she's so drawn to? Why does she feel like him controlling her is love? And I was honestly very frightened for her and the girls. I was very afraid.
One day, my mom called me into the kitchen and I told her, hey, like, I'll be right there. And he actually whooped me with the belt because he said that I shouldn't talk to my mom like that. It was a very difficult situation to be in. I feel like people need to know what's going on, especially like your family. And if they know what's going on, then they can help you. My mom and her mom talked every morning. And when she passed, it basically took away her other half. Chris tried to make it seem like he cared. He tried to make it seem like, oh, he was just so devastated. My mother-in-law passed away, but in all honesty, he really didn't care.
In our culture, and someone passed away, of course, everyone navigated to that house. And I just noticed that Chris was never there.
After my mother-in-law passed away, we got really, really close. And I just remember she called me, and I remember her whispering. And I said, "Why are you whispering?" And she said, "Girl, because he got them cameras in there, and I don't want him to hear what I'm saying." And I was like, huh?
There were a total of 10 cameras. There were 2 in the front. Then they had one pointing towards the hallway right above the front door. He had another one in the corner of the living room, so you can see the full living room and the kitchen. Like every inch of the house was covered in cameras except for our bedrooms and the bathroom.
That was just real creepy for me. You have no privacy, Olivia can't have a decent conversation without, him knowing about it.
He could look at the cameras anytime he wanted to. He can also talk through the cameras, and we can actually talk to him back. So if while he was at work and he seen that we were in a hallway or something, he can actually talk through it. And there were also night vision. Everything was very disturbing. Because if you were living in a house, then you would know, like, this should not be happening. You're not supposed to be living in fear. One night, Chris and my mom were in the room arguing. The door was shut. And all I could hear was like, "Chris, I can't breathe. Chris, I can't breathe." And I opened the door and I said, "Mama, are you okay?" And the door quickly slammed, and it slammed so fast that it hit my forehead. He came out and he started yelling at me. He started putting his finger right here on my forehead and like pushing me back. And I was like, "You think I'm just gonna let you put your hands on my mom?" And she's telling me she's screaming out she can't breathe. Are you crazy? I said, "Mom, are you really gonna let him do this to you? Why are you doing this? Why are you allowing him to do this?" And she basically said, "Ariel, when I feel like enough is enough, then I'm gonna leave." And I said, "Are you serious? You're really gonna sit up here and let him continue to do this to you?" He knew it. He knew that she wouldn't leave him as long as he said the right words. I didn't want them to get married. It took everything out of me not to object during the wedding. But I seen how her face was so lit up. She had the biggest smile on her face. You should have seen her, like her heart was so, it was so happy. I didn't want to be the one to ruin that for her because she had so many hopes. She had so many dreams to be a wife, to be a mother, to live in a stable household. I didn't want to ruin that fantasy for her.
And she came and she hugged us both, and she was crying just to see us there. And she said, "I'm just so happy to see y'all here," because, her sisters weren't there.
It was sad that my siblings wasn't there. It was strictly because Chris did not want them there and they didn't feel welcome.
Chris wasn't going to accept anything that wasn't his way. If it was either his way or the highway. And if he said he didn't want someone there, then that person was not going to be there. He would get into fights at work. And his problems was he didn't know how to control his anger. He also brought recordings back to the house. The surveillance footage that he showed me showed him beating up the inmates so bad that he couldn't even move. They had to transport him to the ER with all his injuries. I couldn't look at that. It was too much for me. I've never seen that type of anger before in my whole life. He showed us so that way we can get in line also, to show like this is what he do to people that don't follow his rules. Chris was having troubles with his job. He was on suspension.
Olivia at that point had built up a clientele base where she had tons of clients utilizing her tax business. Seeing our family kind of struggle, it created an ambition within her for her to go out and want better in life.
She definitely made probably 2-3 times more than he did.
Olivia and Chris, what they did was start another business, which was a food truck business. So Olivia took the money that she earned and invested it into the food truck to get it up and going and get it running. And that way Olivia can continue to do what she was doing.
The idea, I would say, was his. But she was the one that was doing all the work. She was the one going to buy the food, prep the food, make sure the labels and stuff was correct. She made it seem like he did all the work. When in reality, the only thing he did was load the truck and cook the food. That was it. He just had her by the collar and just whatever he wanted, she was gonna go do. So graduating high school, I just knew that I was about to go to college. I was about to be free. And I just had a big sigh of relief of me finally getting away from that house. But it also scared me because I had to leave them behind. Not only my mom, but my sister. That wasn't how things were supposed to go. And yeah. On February 13th of 2019, I had a feeling that I need to talk to my mom and just let her know like, hey, I love you. I'm gonna bring you your Valentine's Day gift up here tomorrow. After that phone call, I was a little uneasy, and that whole night I could not sleep. I just had a feeling like something was gonna happen, like something was off, but I just couldn't put my finger on it.
Beaumont 911, what is the address of your emergency?
Olivia! I'm at home. My wife is shot at me. Please hurry, please, please. My wife, please!
On February 14th, I got a call from Chris around 9:12 in the morning, and He was basically saying, hey, Ariel, something happened.
Come this way.
Okay.
Please, come this way. This way, this way. Okay. Please. Olivia! Okay. Baby!
Sir. Okay. Step back. Step back.
What's up, Mr. Booker?
I was like, is she okay? Like, what's going on? And he was like, Ariel, it don't look good.
Yes.
What happened?
We had a disagreement. And I say, baby, if you're not working with me, you're working against me. I say, we've been doing this. My 19-year-old stepdaughter was 8. My 11-year-old was 1. I say, Olivia, if we can't get it together, we can't be together. Okay. We got several, and I say, I just want a divorce. And her reaction was, and I've been saying this for quite some time, and her reaction was, if you don't want me, I'm gonna kill myself.
And he said that she ran in the house and got the gun, and she put it up to her head, and she was telling him, if I can't have you, nobody can have you.
We got a loaded gun on the side of the bed. We got a loaded shotgun in the corner where the video games is.
And he said that when he was trying to get the gun, that it accidentally went off.
I said, give me the gun. She like, I don't remember which hand. I'm like, give me that gun. What is you doing? Stop trying to scare me. I took it.
So when you grabbed it, it went off?
She yanked. I grabbed it and she yanked back. And the gun went off.
Okay.
The gun went off.
All right.
And I did the best I could.
What's your last name?
Jones.
I got there in a matter of 15 minutes. I drove around the corner, all I seen was cops, and I seen the caution tape. The police officers, they stopped me, and I was just like, I just want to see her. I went to his mom and I asked her, like what's going on? Is she okay? Like, is she alive? And she had the same face Chris had, blank. And she said, Ariel, she's not alive. And I broke down.
I pulled up to a site that I thought I would never see, with police everywhere, with detectives everywhere, with crime scene tape everywhere. I pulled up to a nightmare.
When I got on scene, Olivia's car was in the driveway. Her keys were on the trunk of her car. Her phone was inside of her car. There was cold food product in her car, hamburger meat, things of that nature. There was a bouquet of flowers in the car that seemed to have been there for Valentine's Day. It seemed like she was in the middle of something that morning, and it got interrupted by this incident. We made our way through the house to find Olivia, and she was deceased in her bedroom. She was lying on the floor on her stomach, partially clothed. There was a great deal of blood. There was blood spatter. It wasn't until we rolled her over and saw an exit wound coming out of her left eye that we realized that the round had actually struck her in the back of the head. Something that we did notice throughout the home were cameras, surveillance cameras. So we were hopeful we would be able to get some information from those cameras. Absolutely nothing on that scene pointed to a woman that was suicidal or depressed or intending on taking her life that day.
They're waiting for the lead detectives. They're going to be the ones that actually interview you. So
We first met with Christopher Jones at the Beaumont Police Department. He agreed to speak with us, seemed very willing to do so, wanted us to know what he said had happened. They were preparing the food truck. Sometime during that preparation, he grew upset because he felt that Olivia was not doing her share of the work, had failed him and was not keeping up where she should.
There's no reason that certain things wouldn't get done. I am very particular. If you heard that, that's true. I am very particular. You strive for the best for people. I work really hard, and I don't make excuses for myself, and I don't accept excuses for anybody else.
So because of these things, he decided he wanted to get a divorce. She stormed into the house, went straight to the bedroom, put a gun to her head.
What did you say?
Really? Are you serious? Really? This is not going to solve anything.
Okay.
You know, this is not, you do not want to do that. Put that freaking gun down before you make a mistake and hurt yourself. She was crying. She was crying.
Well, during this time, we happened to ask him about the surveillance cameras around his house. We asked if we could have permission to view those on his phone. He was very willing to allow us access to those cameras.
Say if you want to access just that camera, you touch that, and that's just that camera.
Okay.
You follow what I'm saying?
So far, let's go back to devices.
Yes, sir.
And
Everything is labeled.
carport, backyard, front door, back door, laundry room, inside garage, living room, kitchen.
But the videos weren't there.
Why would there be no recordings on that?
I don't know. It should be. But like I said, the internet, you can go through days and it pretty much does, we shouldn't have bought that. Just keep, like, you can pick whatever day you want and it's never going to be consistent. That's why I say it was a waste of money.
There was a change in Christopher's demeanor. He wouldn't look us in the eye.
Well, I'm wanting desperately to find some video on here that corroborates what you're telling us, but almost all the videos start right after this event happened.
His immediate reaction was that the system was faulty. He told me that he had been lazy in charging the cameras.
I was scared. I was scared.
Okay. Have you been honest with me today?
Yes, ma'am. I was confused.
Look me in the eye.
I was confused about a lot of things.
Look me in the eyes. If you've been honest with me today, tell me how many videos you deleted.
It was obvious that he was being very deceptive.
If I deleted those videos, I look guilty.
Not if you say right now, or what you just said a while ago, I freaked out, I panicked, I did some stuff I shouldn't have done. Is that one of them?
Yes.
How many did you delete?
I don't know, honestly.
Okay.
How many had he deleted? And come to find out, everything except one camera. The only video that we saw around the time of the incident was the one showing that Olivia didn't go storming through the house. She didn't go to the bedroom. None of those things. She was actually in the kitchen, washing up, cleaning up from preparing food. Christopher was in the kitchen as well. He's the one that walked toward the bedroom first. He stopped in the hallway. When Olivia walked around to go toward the bedroom, she was startled to find him there. When that video ended, it was less than 3 minutes later that Christopher was on the phone with 911 saying that his wife was shot in the head.
I'm at home, my wife is trying to leave. Please, her, please, please. My wife, please!
I think the reason that one camera was still there is he ran out of time. Well, Christopher was supposed to be saving his wife's life. He was out in the front yard deleting videos. By the time that interview had ended that day, Christopher was placed under arrest for murder.
And there was several videos shown during that trial that showed him being an absolute monster to my sister. It was like a nightmare living that trial.
Then you gonna be looking stupid. Look on the floor. Look on the floor. Look on the floor, White. Look on the floor. Look on the floor. Look on the floor. Look on the that is why is that like that? You're not paying attention. What the is? You wasn't worried about the son of a bitch a minute ago. That's your mother. No. Look at me like that, bitch. I'm not playing with you, lazy. You want to do some shit now that I'm give it here. You got all the goddamn answers. You don't do a goddamn thing around this right. This your ass, bitch. That's clean dish. That's clean.
I didn't want to. They fell on the floor, so I didn't want to reuse them.
You look at this. You don't pay attention to what the you doing. You all over the place, Olivia. You ain't got the chance to claim no home. Food on the wall. Who you burning now?
Me.
Area don't live here. It's you. It always been you.
Once I seen the video footage, I was just filled with sadness, so much sadness. I felt guilt as to why didn't I see that? Why didn't I know that she was dealing with it was just this bad? You know, why didn't I say something when I could have?
Typically, the victim will make excuses for the violent person. The victim will think that they can fix the violent person. And either way, they think that they're in love with the violent person. Once violence begins, it doesn't just stop.
Act like you ain't got no patience. You want to have a kid? I'll about my kid.
And I'm gonna get emotional. It breaks your heart that she went through what she went through. It hurts to know that she, for whatever reason, could not remove herself from that relationship. And but for that, she would still be here today.
I can honestly say he took a piece of everyone's heart, everyone's soul. He crushed it.
Every day I put on this ribbon, this purple ribbon, I put that ribbon on every day in remembrance of her. And it signifies domestic violence. So I wear it every single day. I love her and I miss her dearly. It's a nightmare. Think about her all the time.
I want my mom to be remembered as that happy thought that everyone has. That place they go to when they need peace, joy, happiness. She deserved more. You know? Like a smile that you see on everyone's face. Like that's her. That food that you love, that's her. The one that makes your soul smile. That's how I want her to be remembered.
On the streets of Los Angeles County, a badge is supposed to represent protection. It is supposed to mean that when danger appears, someone will come. When people are afraid, someone will stand between them and the threat. The uniform, the radio, the patrol car, and the authority that comes with them exist for one purpose: to serve the public. But what happens when the people wearing that badge are accused of creating their own hidden world inside the very institution meant to protect society? What happens when loyalty stops being about the law and starts being about a group? For years, behind the walls of one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the United States, whispers began to circulate. They were not the usual rumors heard on the streets. They did not involve criminals hiding in dark alleys or gangs fighting for territory. These whispers came from inside a sheriff's station. They came from deputies. Men and women who wore the same uniform, carried the same badge, and swore to uphold the same oath. They spoke about secret symbols. About tattoos that carried meaning beyond simple artwork. About groups within the department that had their own rules, their own traditions, and their own hierarchy. A world hidden beneath the surface. A world where some deputies believed that belonging to the right circle could determine whether a person succeeded or struggled. A world where refusing to join could come with consequences. A world where silence was not just encouraged, according to some accusations, it was expected. The name that would eventually become one of the most controversial inside the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department was simple. Banditos. To some, the name represented nothing more than a nickname shared among deputies. To others, it represented something far more disturbing, an alleged internal organization that operated with the mindset of a street gang while existing inside a law enforcement agency. The accusations surrounding the Banditos did not emerge overnight. They were the result of decades of controversy surrounding so-called deputy gangs within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, an institution with a long and complicated history. For years, former employees, civil rights advocates, and investigators had raised concerns about groups of deputies who allegedly created their own identities inside sheriff stations across the county. Names such as Vikings, Grim Reapers, Regulators, and others became associated with allegations of aggressive behavior, loyalty systems, and internal cultures that appeared to exist separately from official department rules. These groups were not accused of operating like traditional criminal organizations on the streets. They wore uniforms. They worked inside government buildings. They answered calls for help. But critics argued that the danger came from something more subtle, the possibility that an unofficial loyalty system could exist inside a powerful institution without accountability. The Banditos became one of the most recognized examples of this controversy. Their story was connected to the East Los Angeles station, a location surrounded by history, culture, and a community that had a complicated relationship with law enforcement. East Los Angeles is a place where generations of families built their lives. A place filled with neighborhoods, businesses, schools, and streets carrying decades of memories. For many residents, the sheriff's station represented authority. It represented the government's presence in their community. But behind the station's doors, according to allegations later made by several deputies, another structure existed. A structure built not around official rank, but around belonging. The Banditos were allegedly identified by a distinctive symbol, a tattoo depicting a skeleton wearing a sombrero, with ammunition and a firearm. To those who accused the group of functioning like a gang, the tattoo was more than an image. It was a mark. A permanent sign of membership. A reminder that some deputies believed there was a difference between simply working at the station and being part of something deeper. The allegations painted a picture of an organization with its own internal culture. New deputies entering the station could find themselves facing an unofficial decision. Would they accept the traditions of the group? Would they seek approval from those who held influence? Or would they remain outsiders? Some former deputies claimed that those who rejected the group could face isolation, harassment, or career obstacles. They described an environment where certain individuals, sometimes referred to as shot callers, held influence beyond their official positions. The accusations suggested that these figures could affect assignments, workplace relationships, and opportunities for advancement. The idea was deeply troubling because law enforcement agencies are built on a clear chain of command. A sergeant answers to a lieutenant. A lieutenant answers to commanders. Orders are supposed to come through official channels. But the allegations surrounding Banditos raised a different possibility. What if another chain of command existed? One based not on rank, but on loyalty. One based not on policy, but on acceptance into a private group. These questions would eventually lead to lawsuits, investigations, and public debate. But before the headlines, before courtrooms, before politicians and community leaders demanded answers, there were individual deputies who claimed they experienced the consequences firsthand. They were not outsiders criticizing law enforcement from a distance. They were members of the department. They wore the same uniform. They entered the same station. They worked alongside the people they would later accuse. And that made the conflict even more complicated. Because this was not simply a story about police and criminals. It was a story about police officers accusing other police officers. It was a story about loyalty, fear, identity, and power. It was about what happens when a group inside a respected institution is accused of becoming more loyal to itself than to the mission it was created to serve. The moment that pushed the Banditos controversy into national attention came in 2018, during a gathering at Kennedy Hall. What was supposed to be an event connected to the sheriff's department became the scene of a confrontation that would later fuel serious allegations. According to lawsuits filed afterward, tensions between different groups of deputies escalated into violence. Several deputies claimed they were attacked by members associated with the Banditos. The incident reportedly left people injured and transformed private complaints into a public crisis. Suddenly, the questions that had existed quietly inside the department moved into the spotlight. Were these just personal conflicts between employees? Or were they evidence of something much larger? Were these accusations exaggerated by workplace disputes? Or were they revealing a culture that had been allowed to grow for years? The answers would not be simple. The Banditos controversy became a battle over perception. Those making accusations described a system where fear and loyalty protected certain individuals. Those defending the department argued that the situation was more complicated and that not every group of deputies sharing friendships or traditions should automatically be labeled a criminal organization. But beyond the legal arguments was a much deeper question. A question that reached far beyond one sheriff station in Los Angeles County. Who watches the people responsible for watching everyone else? Every society depends on trust. Citizens must trust that those who carry authority will use it responsibly. Police officers must trust that their colleagues will stand beside them in dangerous situations. But trust becomes fragile when accusations emerge that power is being used not only to protect the public, but also to protect an inner circle. The Banditos case became a symbol of that fear. A symbol of what can happen when a badge becomes connected to identity, when loyalty becomes stronger than accountability, and when silence becomes easier than confrontation. Because the most unsettling part of the story was not the existence of a tattoo. It was the possibility that behind that symbol was an entire culture. A culture that, according to accusations, operated in the shadows of an institution built around transparency. And as investigators, journalists, and the public began searching for answers, one question remained at the center of everything. Was the Banditos controversy simply the story of a few deputies who crossed the line? Or was it evidence of a much deeper problem hiding within one of America's most powerful law enforcement agencies? This is the story of the Banditos. A story about badges and brotherhood. About power and silence. About the thin line between loyalty and corruption. And about what happens when the people sworn to enforce the law are accused of creating their own rules inside the world of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Los Angeles County is a place built on contrasts. It is a region where millions of people live across a landscape that stretches from crowded urban neighborhoods to quiet suburban communities, from the bright lights of Hollywood to forgotten streets where many residents struggle every day. It is one of the most diverse places in the United States, a massive county where different cultures, languages, and histories exist side by side. And watching over this enormous territory is one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the country, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The LASD is not simply a police department. Its responsibilities are vast. Deputies patrol unincorporated communities, operate county jails, provide security for courts, assist smaller cities, and respond to emergencies across a population larger than that of many American states. The department carries enormous authority. A deputy's decision can change the course of someone's life within seconds. A traffic stop can become an arrest. A routine call can become a life or death situation. A report written inside a station can determine whether someone faces the justice system. Because of that power, law enforcement agencies depend on something that cannot be measured on paper: trust. The public must believe that the people carrying badges are guided by rules, training, and accountability. Inside the department itself, deputies must believe that their workplace operates fairly. Promotions should come from performance. Assignments should come from qualifications. Respect should come from professionalism. But throughout the history of LASD, questions repeatedly emerged about whether unofficial groups inside the department challenged that structure. The controversy surrounding deputy groups did not begin with the Banditos. It was part of a much longer history. For decades, critics accused certain groups of deputies of forming exclusive circles with their own identities and traditions. These groups were sometimes described as deputy gangs, a controversial term that created intense debate. Supporters of that description argued that certain behaviors resembled traditional gang culture: symbols, tattoos, loyalty rituals, and protection of members. Critics of the term argued that comparing law enforcement officers to street gangs was unfair and ignored the reality of police culture, where friendships and strong bonds naturally develop because officers face danger together. But the concern was never simply about friendship. The concern was about power. The fear was that a group of deputies could become more influential than official leadership. That unofficial loyalty could replace professional responsibility. That a deputy's career could depend not only on how well they performed their job, but on whether they belonged to the right group. This history created the environment in which the Banditos controversy would eventually grow. To understand why the allegations became so serious, it is important to understand the culture of law enforcement itself. Police work creates a unique environment. Officers spend hours together in stressful situations. They respond to violence. They see accidents, tragedies, and human suffering. They often depend on their partners for survival. That creates a powerful bond. A bond that many officers describe as a family. But history has shown that any strong group identity can become dangerous when loyalty begins to outweigh accountability. Inside a police agency, that danger becomes even greater because officers possess authority, weapons, and legal power. A group with unhealthy influence does not simply affect workplace relationships. It can affect the public. East Los Angeles Station, where the Banditos controversy centered, carried its own complicated history. The station served a community with deep cultural roots and generations of residents who had experienced both positive and negative interactions with law enforcement. For many families in East Los Angeles, deputies were a familiar presence. They were the officers who responded when someone needed help. They were also representatives of a system that some residents viewed with suspicion because of past experiences involving policing and community relations. That meant the reputation of the sheriff's station mattered. Every allegation connected to the station had consequences beyond the walls of the building. If deputies were accused of creating an internal group with special privileges, the question was not only about workplace behavior. It was about public confidence. The accusations surrounding the banditos described an environment where certain deputies allegedly carried influence because of their connection to the group. The alleged symbols became a major part of the controversy. The tattoo associated with the banditos, a skeleton figure wearing a sombrero, carrying weapons and ammunition, became one of the most discussed elements of the case. For those making accusations, the imagery represented something troubling. They saw it as a symbol of identity separate from the department itself. A sign that some deputies considered themselves part of an exclusive organization. For others, tattoos alone did not prove misconduct. A symbol could have different meanings depending on who was interpreting it. But the issue became more complicated because the tattoos were not viewed in isolation. They were connected to broader allegations about behavior, influence, and retaliation. The accusations described a system where new deputies entering the station could feel pressure to gain acceptance from established members. Some claimed that those who resisted could become targets. They described a workplace where friendships became alliances and alliances became sources of power. One of the most serious concerns was the possibility that official leadership had difficulty controlling unofficial influence. In any organization, leadership depends on authority. A commander gives an order because the position carries responsibility. But according to allegations made by some deputies, certain members of the banditos held a different kind of authority. It was not written in department manuals. It did not appear on organizational charts. It came from reputation, loyalty, and fear. The concept of shot callers became important in discussions about the group. The term suggested individuals who were believed to have influence over decisions and relationships inside the station. The accusation was that these individuals could shape the environment around them. They could determine who was accepted, who was respected, who was isolated. For those who reported feeling targeted, the problem was not simply conflict between co-workers. It was the feeling that they were fighting against a system inside the system. A workplace where complaining could carry consequences. A workplace where speaking openly could damage a career. A workplace where the people expected to enforce rules were accused of creating their own. These allegations created a difficult situation for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The agency had to balance two competing realities. On one side were deputies who defended the traditions and relationships of law enforcement culture. They argued that strong bonds among officers were normal and necessary. On the other side were deputies who claimed those bonds had transformed into something harmful. They argued that the department had ignored warning signs for too long. The controversy forced uncomfortable questions. How does an organization investigate itself? How does a police department hold its own members accountable? What happens when the people responsible for enforcing laws are accused of breaking workplace rules? And perhaps the most difficult question: would people inside the system feel safe enough to speak against it? These questions would become central as lawsuits moved forward and more details emerged. The Banditos case was not a single moment. It was the result of years of tension, years of complaints, and years of debate about culture within law enforcement. It was a story built not only around what happened, but around what many people believed was allowed to happen. Because institutions are not defined only by their official policies. They are defined by the behavior they tolerate. They are defined by the actions they ignore. And they are defined by whether people inside them have the courage to challenge problems when they appear. For the deputies who came forward, the fight was not just about one night or one confrontation. They believed they were exposing something much larger. A hidden structure operating behind the public image of professionalism. A world where the badge remained visible, but the loyalty behind it became uncertain. As the allegations surrounding the Banditos continued to grow, the story moved from private complaints inside a sheriff station to a public debate about power, accountability, and the future of law enforcement culture in Los Angeles County. And at the center of that debate were the people who experienced the conflict firsthand. The deputies who claimed they were targeted. The families who questioned what they were hearing. And the community that wanted to know one thing. When a badge is worn, who is truly in control, the law, or the people behind it, the deputies who became the voices against the system? In many true crime stories, the word victim immediately brings to mind a person who suffered a physical attack, someone whose life was taken, someone whose family was left searching for answers. But some cases are different. Some stories are not about a single moment of violence. They are about a slow erosion of trust. They are about people who enter an institution believing they know what that institution represents, only to discover a reality they never expected. The Banditos controversy is one of those stories. The people who stepped forward were not strangers to the system. They were not outsiders looking in. They were deputies. They were men and women who had chosen law enforcement as a career. They had gone through training, accepted the responsibility of carrying a badge, and entered a profession built around protecting others. They believed they understood the risks of the job. They knew they might face dangerous suspects. They knew they might walk into unpredictable situations. They knew that wearing a uniform meant accepting a certain level of pressure. But what they claimed they were not prepared for was a different kind of danger. The possibility that the conflict would come from inside their own workplace. For some deputies at East Los Angeles Station, the beginning of their careers was filled with pride. Like many people who join law enforcement, they were often motivated by personal experiences. Some wanted to serve their communities. Some admired family members who had worked in public service. Some believed becoming a deputy was a way to create positive change. The badge represented opportunity. It represented responsibility. It represented a chance to be part of something bigger than themselves. Walking into the sheriff's station for the first time, many new deputies likely saw the building as a place where tradition mattered. A place where experienced officers would teach them. A place where teamwork would help them survive the difficult reality of police work. And in many ways, that expectation was true. Law enforcement depends heavily on mentorship. New officers learn from veterans. They learn how to handle stressful encounters. They learn how to communicate with the public. They learn the unwritten lessons that cannot always be found in a training manual. But according to allegations made by some deputies, that same culture of mentorship could also create opportunities for unhealthy loyalty. The line between guidance and control became one of the central issues in the Banditos controversy. Some deputies claimed that acceptance inside the station was not simply about doing a good job. They alleged that there was pressure to recognize certain individuals, respect certain traditions, and avoid challenging the established group. For those who felt excluded, the experience was deeply personal. They were not just employees feeling uncomfortable at work. They were people who had dedicated themselves to an institution they believed in. And they felt that institution had failed to protect them. The emotional impact of these accusations is difficult to understand without considering what law enforcement identity means. A deputy does not simply leave work at the end of a shift. The job becomes part of who they are. The uniform changes how people see them. The badge changes how strangers interact with them. Their decisions carry consequences. Their reputation matters. So when a deputy claims they were mistreated by fellow deputies, the damage is not only professional. It affects their sense of belonging. It affects their confidence. It affects the very reason they joined the profession. Imagine entering a workplace where you expect a team, but instead you begin feeling like you must choose sides. Imagine believing that honesty is important, but fearing that speaking honestly could make you a target. Imagine knowing that the people around you are supposed to have your back in dangerous situations, yet wondering whether they would support you if you challenged them. For the deputies who made accusations against the banditos, that was the reality they described. They claimed that refusing to participate in the group culture could lead to isolation. They claimed they were treated differently because they did not embrace the group. They claimed that the workplace became divided between those who belonged and those who did not. One of the most troubling aspects of these allegations was the idea of silence. In many organizations, especially those built around teamwork, employees may hesitate to report problems involving co-workers. They may worry about damaging relationships. They may fear being labeled as disloyal. But inside law enforcement, the consequences can feel even greater. Officers depend on one another. They rely on trust. They need to know that the person standing beside them during a dangerous call will act professionally. This creates a complicated emotional conflict. When does loyalty become protection of wrongdoing? When does supporting a colleague become refusing to hold them accountable? These were the questions surrounding the deputies who came forward. They were not simply challenging individuals. They were challenging a culture they believed allowed certain behavior to continue. The allegations also raised questions about younger deputies entering the department. A new deputy arriving at a station is often searching for guidance. They want to learn from experienced officers. They want to build relationships. They want to feel accepted. According to accusations surrounding banditos, that natural desire to belong could be used as a form of influence. The concern was that young deputies might feel pressured to follow traditions before fully understanding them. That belonging could become something earned rather than something freely given. For those who rejected that environment, the experience could be lonely. They could still wear the same uniform. They could still work the same streets. But emotionally, they felt separated from the people around them. The conflict eventually became public because some deputies decided silence was no longer an option. They chose lawsuits. They chose to speak publicly. They chose to challenge an organization with far more resources and authority than they had as individuals. That decision carried risks. Speaking against co-workers in law enforcement is not a simple choice. It can affect friendships. It can affect careers. It can change how colleagues view you. But for those deputies, the issue had become bigger than personal discomfort. They believed the problem represented something that affected the entire department. They believed that if the allegations were true, ignoring them would allow the same cycle to continue. The story of the banditos is therefore also the story of those who spoke up. People who found themselves caught between two identities. They were deputies who respected law enforcement. But they were also employees who believed law enforcement itself needed accountability. They were part of the institution, yet they felt forced to challenge it. Their experiences transformed the controversy from an internal dispute into a public examination of police culture. Communities watching the case were left with difficult questions. Could a department investigate problems involving its own members fairly? Could officers report misconduct without fear? Could a culture built on loyalty also embrace accountability? And perhaps the most personal question. What happens to someone who spends their life protecting others when they suddenly need protection themselves? The deputies who accused the banditos were not victims in the traditional sense. They did not lose their lives. They were not physically powerless. They were professionals with authority and training. But their accusations revealed another kind of vulnerability. The vulnerability of standing alone against a powerful group. The vulnerability of questioning people who wear the same badge. The vulnerability of saying that something is wrong when everyone around you expects silence. Their story became the human face of the banditos controversy. Because behind every lawsuit, every investigation, and every public statement were real people. People who had joined the sheriff's department with expectations of service and brotherhood. People who believed the badge represented fairness. People who eventually found themselves asking whether the institution they served was willing to protect them as much as they were expected to protect others. And as the conflict inside East Los Angeles Station continued to grow, the tension that had been building for years moved closer to a breaking point. A moment would come when accusations, rivalries, and resentment would collide in front of witnesses. A moment that would push the Banditos controversy out of the shadows. A moment that would change everything. The night at Kennedy Hall, when the hidden conflict became public. For years, the accusations surrounding the Banditos existed mostly in whispers. They moved through conversations between deputies after shifts ended. They appeared in private complaints, in concerns shared quietly among co-workers, and in questions that many people were afraid to ask openly. Inside a sheriff's station, tension can exist without anyone seeing it. A look across a room. A conversation that suddenly stops when someone approaches. A feeling that certain people hold more influence than their official rank suggests. These moments are difficult to prove. They are difficult to explain to outsiders. But for the deputies who later came forward, they represented a growing sense that something inside East Los Angeles Station was changing. The conflict was no longer simply about personalities. It was about culture. It was about belonging. It was about whether an unofficial group could shape the environment of a workplace that was supposed to operate under clear rules. Then came the night at Kennedy Hall in 2018. A gathering that should have been an ordinary department event became the moment when years of tension erupted into public view. The location itself was not unusual. Kennedy Hall was connected to the Sheriff's Department community, a place where employees could gather away from the intensity of daily police work. For many law enforcement agencies, events like this serve an important purpose. They create opportunities for employees to interact outside of the pressure of patrol duties. They allow deputies and their families to socialize. They strengthen relationships. After all, police work is built on trust. The person standing beside you during a dangerous call is someone you need to rely on completely. Events like these are often designed to build that connection. But according to allegations later made by several deputies, the atmosphere at Kennedy Hall became something very different. Instead of unity, they described a confrontation. Instead of a celebration, they described a moment where existing divisions inside the station became impossible to ignore. The details surrounding that night became the subject of lawsuits and competing accounts. Those who accused members associated with the Banditos described an atmosphere of intimidation and hostility. They claimed that tensions between groups of deputies eventually escalated into a physical confrontation. Several deputies alleged they were attacked by members connected to the group. The incident reportedly resulted in injuries and became the foundation for legal action against the department. But beyond the physical confrontation itself was something more significant. The event exposed a question that had existed beneath the surface for years. What was happening inside East Los Angeles Station? Was this simply an isolated fight between employees? Or was it evidence of a deeper problem? For the deputies who filed complaints, Kennedy Hall represented the moment when private concerns became impossible to dismiss. They argued that the confrontation was not random. They believed it reflected a larger culture where certain deputies felt protected because of their connections. They believed that the same loyalty system that created the group also prevented accountability. The accusations described a workplace divided between insiders and outsiders. Those considered part of the group allegedly had protection and influence. Those outside it allegedly faced consequences for refusing to participate. The emotional impact of that night went beyond physical injuries. For some deputies, it represented a betrayal. They had joined the department expecting that their fellow officers would be their partners, their brothers and sisters in uniform. Instead, they felt that the greatest conflict was happening inside their own organization. The symbolism was powerful. Everyone involved wore the same badge. Everyone represented the same department. But behind that shared uniform were competing ideas about loyalty and responsibility. One side saw strong bonds between deputies as essential. The other side saw those bonds becoming something dangerous when they crossed into favoritism and intimidation. After Kennedy Hall, the controversy gained momentum. The deputies who felt harmed did not simply return to normal work. They began seeking answers. They questioned whether supervisors had done enough to prevent the conflict. They questioned whether department leadership had recognized warning signs. They questioned whether complaints about internal groups had been taken seriously. Those questions quickly became part of a much larger legal battle. The lawsuits that followed accused the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department of failing to stop the alleged behavior. The argument was not only that individual deputies had acted improperly. It was that the department itself had allowed a culture to develop where such behavior could exist. This distinction became one of the most important parts of the controversy. If one employee behaves badly, responsibility may belong to that individual. But if an organization ignores repeated warnings, fails to investigate concerns, or allows certain people to operate with unofficial power, then the question becomes much larger. The issue becomes institutional. Could leadership have prevented what happened? Were supervisors aware of tensions inside the station? Did the department have enough systems in place to protect employees who raised concerns? These questions became central as the public learned more about the allegations. The reaction was immediate. Civil rights advocates demanded answers. Media investigations examined the history of deputy groups within LASD. Community members questioned whether the controversy reflected a broader problem within law enforcement culture. For many residents, the idea was disturbing. Police officers are given enormous responsibility. They have the legal authority to stop people, arrest them, use force, and make decisions that affect lives. That authority depends on public confidence. If the public believes officers are controlled by unofficial groups rather than official rules, that confidence becomes damaged. The Kennedy Hall incident therefore became more than a workplace dispute. It became a symbol. A symbol of the larger debate about power inside law enforcement. A symbol of the struggle between loyalty and accountability. A symbol of the fear that any organization, even one designed to enforce rules, can develop its own hidden systems. But as the accusations became public, another battle began. The battle over truth. The deputies making accusations had their experiences. The accused deputies had their own perspectives. The department had to respond. And the public had to decide what to believe. The legal process would require evidence. Witness statements. Internal records. Testimony. Every side would attempt to explain what really happened. Because the central question was not simply whether a fight occurred. The deeper question was why it happened. What allowed tensions to reach that point? What kind of culture existed behind the scenes? And how long had the warning signs been ignored? The Kennedy Hall confrontation became the turning point because it transformed rumors into allegations that could no longer remain private. The Banditos name, once known mostly inside law enforcement circles, became recognized by the public. The image of the tattooed deputy group became a subject of national discussion. People began asking whether a police station could contain something resembling the very organization's officers were trained to fight against. It was an uncomfortable question. A disturbing question. But it was a question that demanded an answer. Because the most important issue was not the existence of a symbol or a name. It was the possibility that power inside the department had been operating outside the control of official authority. And after the events of Kennedy Hall, the search for answers began. Investigators started examining what happened that night. Lawyers began building cases. Former employees and current deputies prepared to tell their stories. The conflict that had existed quietly for years was now exposed. The spotlight had arrived. And once the light was turned on, the question became unavoidable. How deep did the banditos culture really go, inside the investigation, the evidence, the allegations, and the search for the truth? After the events at Kennedy Hall, the banditos controversy entered a new phase. For years, concerns about deputy groups inside the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had existed mostly behind closed doors. There were conversations held among employees, complaints shared privately, and warnings that often struggled to move beyond the walls of the department. But the confrontation at Kennedy Hall changed the situation. Now there were injuries. There were witnesses. There were official complaints. There were lawsuits. And most importantly, there was public attention. The question was no longer whether rumors existed. The question was whether those rumors reflected a deeper reality inside the sheriff's department. Investigators, attorneys, journalists, and community leaders began looking beyond the single incident. They wanted to understand the environment that surrounded it. Because in cases involving workplace violence, the event itself is only one piece of the story. A fight does not happen in a vacuum. It is usually the result of relationships, conflicts, decisions, and tensions that existed long before the moment when everything finally breaks. For those investigating the banditos allegations, the search for answers required looking backward. They examined the history of deputy groups within LASD. They examined previous complaints. They examined the relationships between employees at East Los Angeles Station. They examined whether the department had recognized warning signs before the confrontation occurred. The investigation was not simply about identifying who was present at Kennedy Hall. It was about understanding the culture surrounding them. One of the most discussed pieces of evidence was the alleged use of symbols. The tattoos associated with the banditos became a major focus of public attention. The image reportedly connected to the group, a skeleton wearing a sombrero with weapons and ammunition, became controversial because of its resemblance to the symbols often used by traditional gangs. For those who believed the banditos functioned like a gang, the tattoo represented membership. A visible sign that certain deputies belonged to something separate from the official department structure. They argued that the meaning was not just artistic. It was social. It represented identity, loyalty, and status. However, supporters of the accused deputies challenged that interpretation. They argued that tattoos alone did not prove misconduct. A symbol could be interpreted differently depending on perspective. A tattoo could represent friendship, history, or personal identity without necessarily proving criminal behavior. This disagreement became one of the central battles in the public discussion. What does a symbol actually mean? Does a tattoo reveal a person's actions? Or does meaning come from what people do? Investigators had to look beyond images. They had to examine behavior. The allegations described a pattern. According to lawsuits and statements from some deputies, members of the banditos allegedly exercised influence over the workplace in ways that went beyond normal professional relationships. Some former and current deputies claimed that group members had power over assignments and workplace dynamics. They alleged that certain deputies could determine who was accepted and who was excluded. They described an atmosphere where social connections could affect professional experiences. The most serious accusations involved retaliation. Some deputies claimed that those who opposed the group or refused to participate experienced negative consequences. They described feeling isolated. They described being treated differently. They described a workplace where speaking out created fear. For investigators, these claims raised important questions. Were these simply interpersonal conflicts? Or was there a pattern of behavior? A workplace disagreement can happen anywhere. People can dislike co-workers. People can form friendships. People can have disagreements. But the allegations surrounding Banditos suggested something different. They suggested a system where relationships created power, where loyalty could influence opportunities, where some employees believed they had to choose between professional independence and acceptance. To understand the controversy, investigators also had to examine the structure of the sheriff's department itself. Large organizations often struggle with internal accountability. A department with thousands of employees cannot see every interaction. Supervisors cannot monitor every conversation. Leaders must rely on policies, reporting systems, and the willingness of employees to raise concerns. But what happens when employees fear those systems will not protect them? What happens when the people reporting problems believe the problem involves people with influence? This became one of the most important questions surrounding the Banditos case. The deputies who came forward argued that the issue was not only the behavior of individual members. They argued that the department had failed to create an environment where complaints could be addressed safely. They claimed that years of tolerance allowed the alleged culture to continue. The department faced criticism from outside organizations and community advocates who questioned whether leadership had done enough. The controversy became part of a larger national conversation about police accountability. Across the United States, law enforcement agencies were facing increased scrutiny. Communities were questioning how officers were disciplined, how complaints were investigated, how departments handled misconduct within their own ranks. The Banditos controversy fit into that larger discussion because it raised a unique concern. Many accountability problems involve interactions between police and civilians. This case involved police and police. The conflict was happening inside the institution. That made it especially sensitive. The public expects law enforcement agencies to investigate wrongdoing. But when the allegations involve members of the agency itself, the process becomes more complicated. Who investigates the investigators? Who holds the guardians accountable? These questions followed the case from the beginning. As more information emerged, investigators began looking at individual stories. The details of each deputy's experience mattered. A single complaint can be dismissed as a misunderstanding. But multiple complaints create a different picture. They force organizations to ask whether there is a pattern. The lawsuits filed by deputies described experiences that went beyond the Kennedy Hall confrontation. They described years of tension. They described a workplace where some people felt powerless. They described a struggle between maintaining loyalty and demanding accountability. For those making the accusations, the investigation was not about revenge. They wanted recognition that their concerns mattered. They wanted the department to acknowledge what they believed had happened. They wanted changes that would prevent similar situations in the future. But the accused deputies and defenders of the department faced their own concerns. They argued that the public conversation risked turning accusations into conclusions before all facts were examined. They emphasized the importance of due process. They warned against judging individuals based only on association or appearance. This created a complicated reality. The Banditos controversy was not a simple story with obvious heroes and villains. It was a conflict involving competing versions of events. A conflict where every person involved had something at stake. Careers, reputations, trust. The investigation continued as attorneys gathered evidence and the department faced increasing pressure. The public wanted answers. The deputies involved wanted justice. The sheriff's department wanted to defend its integrity while responding to serious allegations. And behind all of it was the larger question that had followed the case from the beginning. Was the Banditos controversy the result of a few individuals behaving badly? Or was it evidence of a culture that had been allowed to grow for years? The search for the truth would not be easy. Because the most difficult cases are not always the ones where evidence is missing. Sometimes the hardest cases are the ones where everyone has a different version of what the evidence means. And as the investigation moved forward, one thing became clear. The story of the Banditos was no longer only about a fight at Kennedy Hall. It was about the hidden structures of power inside one of America's most influential law enforcement agencies. And the next stage of the battle would determine whether those allegations could finally be proven, challenged, or dismissed. The investigation into the Banditos controversy was never going to be simple. From the outside, people wanted a clear answer. They wanted to know who was right and who was wrong. They wanted a beginning, a middle, and an ending. But inside the walls of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, the reality was far more complicated. Because this was not a case where investigators were searching for a single criminal hiding from the law. There was no traditional suspect walking through the streets with a weapon. There was no abandoned vehicle waiting to be discovered. There was no single piece of evidence that could immediately explain everything. Instead, investigators were examining something much harder to define. A culture. A workplace environment. A system of relationships and loyalties that existed beneath the official structure of the department. The challenge was not only finding out what happened. The challenge was understanding why it happened. For years, concerns about deputy groups had followed LASD. The accusations were not limited to the Banditos. Different groups had been identified throughout the department's history, each with its own alleged symbols, traditions, and internal identities. To critics, this suggested a pattern. They argued that the department had allowed unofficial groups to develop for decades. Groups that could create their own rules and protect their own members. Supporters of the department pushed back against that idea. They argued that law enforcement naturally creates strong bonds because officers face dangerous situations together. A firefighter depends on another firefighter. A soldier depends on another soldier. A police officer depends on another officer. Those relationships are not automatically signs of corruption. The question was where the line existed. Where did friendship end and improper influence begin? Where did loyalty become protection? Where did a group of co-workers become something that threatened the integrity of the organization? These were the questions investigators had to confront. As lawsuits moved forward, attorneys began gathering testimony from deputies who claimed they had experienced problems at East Los Angeles Station. Their stories described a workplace where certain individuals allegedly had significant influence. They claimed that the Banditos were not simply a group of friends. They claimed the organization had structure. They claimed there were expectations. They claimed there were consequences for those who refused to participate. One of the most difficult aspects of investigating these allegations was the issue of fear. Fear is often invisible. It does not leave physical evidence. It does not appear in photographs. It cannot always be proven through documents. But fear can shape behavior. A person may stop reporting problems. A person may avoid certain co-workers. A person may remain silent even when they believe something is wrong. According to some deputies involved in the controversy, silence became part of the problem. They claimed that some employees were afraid to challenge powerful individuals inside the station because they worried about retaliation. This created a difficult situation. If people are afraid to report misconduct, problems can continue. But if accusations are made without proper investigation, innocent people can also be harmed. A fair process requires both accountability and evidence. That balance became central to the Banditos case. Investigators examined the events surrounding Kennedy Hall, but they also looked deeper. They wanted to understand whether the confrontation represented an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. They examined workplace relationships. They examined previous complaints. They examined whether supervisors responded appropriately when concerns were raised. The role of leadership became one of the most debated issues. A police department depends on a clear chain of command. Every supervisor has responsibility. Every rank carries authority. If problems exist inside a station, leadership is expected to address them. But critics argued that the existence of deputy groups suggested that official authority was sometimes weakened by unofficial power. They questioned whether supervisors had enough control over the culture inside their own station. They asked whether leaders knew more than they admitted. They asked whether complaints had been ignored because confronting the issue would create conflict. These questions created a difficult situation for LASD leadership. The department had to defend its employees while also responding to serious allegations. It had to protect due process while acknowledging public concerns. It had to show that misconduct would not be tolerated while avoiding conclusions before investigations were complete. This balancing act became a major challenge. The public often sees law enforcement agencies as symbols of order. People expect officers to enforce rules consistently. But the Banditos controversy forced people to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Even organizations built around enforcing rules can struggle with enforcing rules internally. The investigation also highlighted a deeper issue within police culture. The concept of the blue wall of silence. The phrase has often been used to describe situations where officers protect fellow officers from consequences. The reality is complex. Many officers reject misconduct and believe strongly in accountability. Many officers risk their careers to report wrongdoing. But critics argue that in some environments, loyalty between officers can become so strong that it discourages people from speaking openly. The Banditos allegations brought this debate into focus. Were deputies protecting each other because they shared the bond of a dangerous profession? Or were some protecting each other from accountability? The answer would determine how the case was understood. As the legal process continued, the stories of individual deputies became increasingly important. Every complaint represented a personal experience. Every accusation represented someone who believed they had been harmed. For those deputies, this was not an abstract debate about police culture. It was their workplace. Their career. Their daily reality. Some claimed they felt trapped between two choices. Stay silent and protect their careers. Or speak out and risk becoming isolated. That choice is one of the hardest decisions any employee can face. Especially when the people involved are not ordinary co-workers, but individuals with authority and influence. The investigation also attracted attention from outside organizations. Civil rights groups and community advocates argued that the issue was larger than one sheriff station. They believed the case raised questions about accountability throughout law enforcement. If an agency cannot control internal misconduct, they argued, how can the public trust that agency to hold others accountable? The controversy became a mirror reflecting broader concerns. Power, authority, transparency, trust. The Banditos case forced uncomfortable conversations because it challenged the traditional image of policing. The public often imagines corruption as something obvious. A bribe. A criminal deal. A clear violation of the law. But institutional problems can be much harder to recognize. They can develop slowly. They can become normalized. They can hide behind tradition. They can survive because people are afraid to question them. That was the concern raised by critics of the Banditos. They argued that the greatest danger was not one event. It was the possibility that a harmful culture had been allowed to exist for years. As investigators continued examining evidence and testimony, the case moved toward a critical moment. The accusations had been made. The stories had been told. The public attention had arrived. Now came the question that would determine everything. Could the allegations be proven? Could the people who claimed they were harmed demonstrate that what happened was part of a larger system? Or would the controversy remain a matter of conflicting stories and unanswered questions? The search for the truth continued. And as more information came forward, the battle surrounding the banditos became not only a legal fight, but a fight over the meaning of the badge itself. Because at the center of the controversy was something far more important than tattoos, names, or internal politics. It was trust. The trust between deputies and their department. The trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. And the trust that the people given the power to enforce the law would always be willing to follow it themselves. For years, the allegations surrounding the banditos existed in a difficult space between rumor and reality. There were stories. There were complaints. There were people who believed something was wrong. But inside any powerful organization, especially one built around loyalty and hierarchy, exposing internal problems is never easy. The people who speak first often carry the heaviest burden. They risk being questioned. They risk being criticized. They risk becoming isolated from the very colleagues they once considered family. For the deputies who came forward against the alleged banditos culture, the decision to speak was not simply a professional choice. It was a personal one. They were challenging people they worked beside. People they saw every day. People who wore the same uniform. People who understood the same dangers of the job. In law enforcement, where trust between partners can mean survival, accusing fellow deputies of creating an environment of intimidation required enormous courage. But as more complaints emerged and more details became public, the banditos controversy reached a turning point. The silence surrounding the issue began to disappear. The allegations could no longer be treated as isolated disagreements. They became part of a larger conversation about the culture inside the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The breakthrough did not come from one dramatic moment. It came from accumulation. One complaint became two. Two became several. Private concerns became public statements. And slowly, a picture began to form. A picture of deputies who claimed that the problem was not only what happened at Kennedy Hall. The problem, they argued, was the environment that allowed the confrontation to happen. The lawsuits filed by deputies became a major part of this process. Through legal action, individuals who felt harmed were able to formally describe their experiences. They described what they believed happened inside East Los Angeles Station. They described the alleged influence of the banditos. They described the pressure they felt. They described the fear of challenging a group that they believed held power inside their workplace. The legal process forced the department to respond. Questions that once existed only among employees now had to be addressed publicly. What did supervisors know? What actions were taken? Were complaints properly investigated? Did leadership understand the seriousness of the allegations? These questions placed LASD under intense scrutiny. The department had to confront a difficult reality. Even if every allegation could not be proven exactly as described, the fact that so many concerns had reached the public created a crisis of confidence. Trust had been damaged. The controversy also attracted attention because of the unusual nature of the allegations. Most public discussions about police misconduct involve interactions between officers and civilians. This case was different. The accusations came from within. The people raising concerns were not questioning whether police should have authority. They were questioning how that authority was managed internally. They were asking whether a department responsible for enforcing rules had enough mechanisms to enforce those rules on itself. This made the banditos controversy especially uncomfortable. Because the issue was not simply about individual behavior. It was about institutional responsibility. A police department is designed around control, rules, training, supervision, accountability. But if employees believe unofficial groups can influence careers, relationships, and workplace conditions, then the official structure becomes weaker. The department may still have policies on paper, but culture determines how those policies work in reality. This was the heart of the debate. The difference between what an organization says and what an organization allows. As the controversy continued, attention turned toward the question of whether LASD had done enough to address deputy groups. Critics argued that the department had a long history of similar controversies and should have recognized warning signs earlier. They pointed to previous concerns about deputy cliques and argued that the Banditos allegations were part of a recurring pattern. They believed that failing to confront the issue allowed these groups to maintain influence. Supporters of the department argued that solving cultural problems inside a large organization is complicated. They emphasized that accusations must be carefully investigated. They warned that assumptions could unfairly damage the reputations of individual deputies. Both sides faced difficult questions. How can an organization eliminate harmful behavior without punishing people based only on association? How can employees report problems without turning every workplace conflict into a public scandal? How can leadership maintain unity while demanding accountability? The answers were not simple. But one thing had changed. The conversation was no longer happening quietly. The Banditos name had become known beyond East Los Angeles Station. It became part of a national discussion about police accountability. The alleged symbols associated with the group became widely discussed. The lawsuits became public records. The accusations became part of the historical conversation surrounding LASD. The department could no longer avoid the issue. One of the most important breakthroughs was the recognition that the problem, whether proven in every detail or not, involved more than individual personalities. It involved culture. Culture is one of the hardest things to change in any organization because it is built over time. It is created by traditions, by habits, by what leaders reward, by what employees tolerate. A toxic culture does not appear overnight. It develops through small moments. A complaint ignored. A behavior excused. A warning dismissed. A person afraid to speak. Over years, those moments can create an environment where people begin to believe certain rules apply differently to certain individuals. That was the fear expressed by critics of the Banditos. They believed the controversy revealed a problem deeper than one group of deputies. They believed it showed what could happen when internal loyalty becomes stronger than institutional responsibility. For the deputies who spoke out, the legal battle was about more than compensation or recognition. It was about being heard. Many believed they had a responsibility to challenge what they saw. They believed silence would allow the same problems to continue. Their decision to speak transformed them from employees with complaints into central figures in a national debate. They became examples of a difficult reality inside many organizations. Change often begins with people who are willing to challenge the system they belong to. But that choice is rarely easy. Those who challenge powerful groups often face criticism. They may be accused of betrayal. They may be questioned by people who do not understand why they spoke. They may lose relationships they once valued. The deputies involved in the Banditos controversy faced those pressures. They had to defend not only their claims, but their motivations. They had to explain why they believed speaking publicly was necessary. As the investigation and legal proceedings continued, the focus shifted toward accountability. What consequences would follow? Would the department implement reforms? Would those accused face discipline? Would the controversy lead to lasting change? The answers would shape not only the future of East Los Angeles Station, but also the larger conversation about deputy groups within LASD. Because the Banditos controversy had become something bigger than a single case. It had become a test. A test of whether an institution could examine itself honestly. A test of whether loyalty and accountability could exist together. A test of whether a badge could represent authority while still being subject to the same standards as everyone else. The breakthrough was not simply that people began talking. The breakthrough was that people began listening. The voices that had once been hidden became impossible to ignore. And as the legal battle moved forward, the question remained. Would the system protect itself? Or would it finally confront the shadows inside its own walls? The courtroom is often described as the place where truth is revealed. A place where evidence replaces rumors. Where witnesses sit under oath. Where accusations must be tested. For the deputies involved in the Banditos controversy, the courtroom became the next battlefield. The conflict that had started inside a sheriff station moved into a legal arena where every claim would face examination. The questions that had haunted the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for years now had to be confronted publicly. Were the allegations against the Banditos a misunderstanding between co-workers? Or were they evidence of a deeper culture problem? Had individual deputies crossed a line? Or had the department itself failed by allowing the alleged environment to exist? These questions became central as lawsuits moved forward. Unlike a criminal trial, where prosecutors must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, civil lawsuits focus on responsibility and harm. The deputies who filed claims were not only asking what happened. They were asking who should be held accountable for allowing it to happen. Their argument was that the problem was larger than the individuals directly involved. They claimed that the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had a responsibility to maintain a safe workplace and protect employees from harassment, intimidation, and retaliation. According to the allegations, the department failed to stop a culture that had developed over time. They argued that leadership had received warnings but did not take sufficient action. For the deputies bringing the claims, this was not simply about one night at Kennedy Hall. That night was the moment when the conflict became visible. But they believed the roots went much deeper. They described years of tension, fear, and frustration. They claimed that the confrontation was not an isolated explosion. It was the result of a workplace environment that had been allowed to develop. On the other side, the controversy presented a difficult legal and organizational challenge. The sheriff's department had to respond to serious accusations while also protecting the rights of individual employees. The department could not simply declare someone guilty based on public pressure. Evidence mattered. Facts mattered. Due process mattered. This created a complicated situation. The public wanted answers. The deputies who made accusations wanted accountability. The accused deputies wanted fairness. And the department wanted to defend its reputation while addressing concerns. The legal battles surrounding the Banditos controversy became part of a broader examination of law enforcement culture. For many observers, the issue was not only about one group at one station. It represented a larger question. Can a police department effectively police itself? Law enforcement agencies exist to investigate wrongdoing. They are expected to enforce laws and protect communities. But when allegations involve officers themselves, the situation becomes much more complicated. The institution responsible for accountability becomes the institution being questioned. This creates a challenge that many police agencies across the United States have faced. How do you maintain loyalty among officers while ensuring that loyalty does not prevent accountability? The Banditos controversy forced that question into public discussion. The lawsuits brought attention to allegations about internal influence. They focused on claims that certain deputies had power beyond their official positions. They examined whether workplace culture allowed some employees to feel protected. They questioned whether leadership had enough control over the environment inside the station. One of the most significant issues was the idea of unofficial authority. Every organization has informal relationships. Employees naturally develop friendships. Experienced workers often become mentors. Certain people become respected because of their knowledge or personality. That alone is not unusual. The concern raised in the Banditos case was whether informal influence had become something more powerful. Whether certain individuals could affect the careers and experiences of others. Whether employees felt they had to gain approval from unofficial leaders. Whether refusing to participate could create professional consequences. These questions became the heart of the legal debate. The courtroom also became a place where different interpretations of the same events collided. To critics, the alleged tattoos, symbols, and relationships represented a dangerous culture. They saw them as signs of a group identity that competed with official authority. To defenders, those same elements did not automatically prove wrongdoing. They argued that assumptions could not replace evidence. A symbol alone does not explain a person's actions. A friendship alone does not prove misconduct. The law requires more than suspicion. It requires proof. This tension made the case difficult. Because culture is often harder to measure than a specific action. A physical injury can be documented. A financial loss can be calculated. But how do you measure fear? How do you prove the effect of workplace intimidation? How do you demonstrate that a person's career was affected by an invisible system of influence? These were the challenges faced by everyone involved. For the deputies who came forward, the legal process represented a chance to tell their stories. They wanted their experiences recognized. They wanted the department to acknowledge that they believed they had been harmed. They wanted changes that would prevent others from facing similar situations. Their supporters argued that accountability was necessary for trust. They believed that a department cannot demand public respect while ignoring internal problems. But the controversy also raised concerns about fairness. Accused deputies faced public judgment before all legal questions were resolved. Their names and reputations became connected to a highly controversial case. The legal process had to separate allegations from proven facts. That separation is one of the most important principles in any justice system. As the lawsuits continued, the Banditos controversy became a symbol of a much larger debate about police reform. Across the country, communities were asking how law enforcement agencies could improve transparency and accountability. They were asking whether internal investigations were enough. They were asking whether stronger oversight was necessary. They were asking how institutions could change cultures that had existed for decades. The pressure on LASD was significant. The department had to show that it could confront internal problems rather than simply defend itself. Because public trust depends not on the absence of mistakes, but on how institutions respond when mistakes or accusations occur. A department that refuses to acknowledge problems can lose credibility. A department that investigates honestly can rebuild confidence. The Banditos case became a test of that principle. The outcome was not just about money or legal decisions. It was about reputation. It was about whether employees felt safe reporting concerns. It was about whether communities believed the people protecting them were also willing to hold themselves accountable. The courtroom battle revealed something important about power. Power is not only about what someone can do. It is also about whether others believe they can challenge that person. When people fear consequences for speaking, power becomes stronger. When people can speak without fear, accountability becomes possible. That was the central issue behind the Banditos controversy. Not simply tattoos. Not simply a confrontation. Not simply a lawsuit. but the question of whether an organization could confront uncomfortable truths about itself. As the legal process moved forward, the future of the controversy depended on what came next. Would reforms follow? Would lessons be learned? Would the department change the culture that critics had challenged for years? Or would the same patterns continue under a different name? The courtroom had opened the door. The evidence had been examined. The accusations had been heard. But the final judgment would not only come from judges or legal decisions. It would come from history. Because years later, people would look back at the Banditos controversy and ask a simple question. When an institution discovered shadows inside its own walls, did it choose to confront them, or protect them? Every major controversy leaves something behind. Sometimes it leaves a courtroom decision. Sometimes it leaves a prison sentence. Sometimes it leaves a name that becomes permanently connected to a moment in history. But some controversies leave something more complicated. They leave questions. The Banditos controversy did not end when the lawsuits were filed or when investigations began. The consequences continued long after the first accusations became public. Because the true impact of a case like this is not measured only by what happens to individual people. It is measured by what happens to an institution. It is measured by whether trust can be repaired. It is measured by whether lessons are learned. And it is measured by whether the same conditions that created the controversy are allowed to return. For the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, the aftermath of the Banditos allegations became a period of reflection and criticism. The department faced pressure from many directions. From employees who wanted a safer workplace. From community members who demanded accountability. From officials and oversight groups who questioned whether internal problems had been handled properly. The controversy forced LASD to confront a difficult reality. An organization's reputation is not built only by its successes. It is also defined by how it responds when something goes wrong. A police department can respond to thousands of emergencies. It can arrest dangerous criminals. It can protect communities during difficult moments. But public trust can be damaged when people believe the department is unable or unwilling to address problems inside its own ranks. The Banditos case became a symbol of that challenge. For many critics, the issue was never just about a few deputies. They argued that the deeper problem was the environment that allowed groups with unofficial identities and influence to exist within the department. They questioned how such a culture could survive. How could employees feel pressured? How could complaints continue? How could internal conflicts grow without being resolved earlier? These questions pushed the conversation beyond individual responsibility. They focused attention on leadership. Because every organization has a culture. And culture does not come only from policies written in manuals. Culture comes from what leaders encourage. What they ignore. What they reward. What they tolerate. A department may have strict rules against misconduct. But if employees believe those rules are not applied equally, the written policies become less meaningful. That was the concern raised by those who criticized the handling of deputy groups. They argued that accountability must be consistent. A badge cannot provide special protection. A position of authority cannot create immunity. The same standards expected from the public must also apply inside the institution. The aftermath of the Banditos controversy also affected the deputies involved personally. For those who made accusations, speaking out changed their lives. They became associated with a highly controversial public issue. Their professional relationships changed. Their experiences became part of legal records and public discussions. They had taken a risk by challenging people within their own organization. That decision carried emotional consequences. When someone challenges a powerful group, they often face a difficult reality. Even if they believe they are doing the right thing, they may lose a sense of belonging. The workplace that once felt like a community may never feel the same again. For law enforcement officers, that loss can be especially painful. The bond between deputies is often described as unique. They share experiences that many civilians will never understand. They face danger together. They witness difficult situations together. That creates a strong connection. But the Banditos controversy raised a question about the limits of that connection. When does brotherhood become silence? When does protecting a colleague become protecting behavior that should be challenged? When does loyalty become a barrier to justice? Those questions continued long after the immediate legal battles. The controversy also affected public perception. For communities that already had complicated relationships with law enforcement, the allegations created additional concerns. Residents began asking whether internal police culture could influence how officers interacted with the public. They wondered whether a department could effectively serve the community if some employees believed loyalty to a group came before responsibility to the organization. These concerns were especially significant because law enforcement depends on cooperation. Police need communities to report crimes. They need witnesses to come forward. They need residents to believe that officers will treat them fairly. Without trust, effective policing becomes much more difficult. The Banditos controversy therefore became part of a larger national discussion about police accountability. Across America, communities were examining how law enforcement agencies handle misconduct. They were questioning whether internal systems were strong enough. They were debating how much outside oversight was necessary. They were asking how institutions could change cultures that had existed for generations. The controversy also highlighted an uncomfortable truth about organizations. Problems do not always begin with openly corrupt individuals. Sometimes they begin with small behaviors that are ignored. A joke that crosses a line. A tradition that excludes others. A complaint that is dismissed. A person who chooses silence because speaking seems too difficult. Over time, these moments can create an environment where unhealthy behavior becomes normal. That was the fear behind the Banditos allegations. Not simply that certain deputies behaved badly, but that a culture developed where people believed they could do so without consequences. The question of reform became central. How does an organization prevent unofficial groups from gaining unhealthy influence? How does leadership identify problems before they become crises? How does an agency encourage employees to report concerns without fear? These are not simple questions. Changing culture is one of the hardest challenges any institution faces. A new policy can be written in a day. A new rule can be announced in a press conference. But changing beliefs and behaviors takes much longer. It requires consistent leadership. It requires transparency. It requires accountability. And most importantly, it requires people inside the organization to believe that change is real. The Banditos controversy remains significant because it represents a conflict that exists far beyond one sheriff station. It represents the struggle between tradition and reform. Between loyalty and accountability. Between protecting an institution's image and confronting uncomfortable truths. The case also serves as a reminder that power always requires oversight. This principle applies everywhere. In government. In business. In organizations. In any place where some people have authority over others. Without accountability, even respected institutions can develop problems. The badge itself is not the issue. The uniform is not the issue. The problem begins when people believe symbols and positions place them above consequences. That is the deeper lesson behind the Banditos controversy. A badge represents authority. But authority without accountability becomes dangerous. A team can create strength. But loyalty without responsibility can become harmful. A workplace can create bonds. But those bonds must never replace fairness. Years after the controversy began, the name banditos continued to represent more than a group of deputies. It represented a national conversation about what happens when hidden cultures emerge inside powerful institutions. It represented the challenge of holding respected organizations accountable. And it represented the difficult reality that sometimes the people who expose problems are the same people who once believed most strongly in the system. The story of the banditos is ultimately not only about allegations. It is about choices. The choice to speak or remain silent. The choice to defend tradition or demand change. The choice to protect an institution's reputation or protect its integrity. Because the strongest institutions are not those that claim they have no problems. The strongest institutions are those willing to confront problems when they appear. And the final question left behind by the banditos controversy remains one that continues to challenge law enforcement agencies everywhere. When power exists inside the shadows, who has the courage to turn on the light? The story of the banditos was never only about a tattoo. It was never only about a confrontation at Kennedy Hall. It was never only about a lawsuit or a group of deputies accused of crossing a line. At its deepest level, the controversy was about something far more complicated. Power. Human psychology. Belonging. And the dangerous possibility that a group created to provide support could slowly transform into a system of control. Throughout history, people have formed groups for survival. Humans are naturally drawn toward communities. We search for connection. We seek acceptance. We want to know that we are not alone. This instinct exists everywhere. In families. In friendships. In workplaces. In military units. And especially in professions where people experience extreme pressure together. Law enforcement is one of those professions. A deputy walking into a dangerous situation does not rely only on training. They rely on the person standing beside them. They trust that their partner will react quickly. They trust that their colleagues will protect them. They trust that someone will be there when everything becomes chaotic. This kind of environment naturally creates powerful bonds. Those bonds are not a weakness. They are necessary. But history has shown that any strong bond can become dangerous when loyalty begins to replace accountability. That was the concern at the center of the banditos controversy. The allegations suggested that a group identity became stronger than professional identity. Instead of simply being deputies working together, some employees claimed that certain individuals operated according to another set of expectations. A system based on acceptance. A system based on loyalty. A system where belonging mattered. For psychologists who study group behavior, this type of dynamic is not unusual. Groups often create their own language, their own traditions, their own symbols. These elements strengthen connection among members. They create a feeling of identity. They tell members, you are part of something. You are different from outsiders. You belong here. In healthy organizations, this identity supports teamwork. It encourages cooperation. It creates pride. But in unhealthy environments, group identity can become exclusive. The group begins defining itself not only by who belongs, but by who does not. Outsiders become viewed with suspicion. Criticism becomes seen as betrayal. Questions become interpreted as attacks. And slowly, the group can begin protecting itself more than the purpose it was created to serve. This was one of the biggest concerns raised by critics of the banditos. They argued that the alleged group mentality created a division inside a department that depended on unity. Instead of every deputy being equally connected through the badge, They claimed some deputies created a separate identity within the badge. The symbolism became important because symbols influence behavior. A uniform is a symbol. A badge is a symbol. A flag is a symbol. A tattoo can also become a symbol. Symbols communicate identity. They communicate loyalty. They communicate belonging. The controversy surrounding the banditos tattoos was therefore not simply about ink on skin. It was about what those images represented to different people. To critics, the tattoos suggested membership in an organization that existed separately from official department culture. To defenders, they were not proof of wrongdoing by themselves. The debate revealed a larger truth. Symbols do not create culture. People create culture. A symbol only becomes powerful because of the meaning people attach to it. The investigation into the banditos also raised questions about authority. Every organization has two types of power: formal power and informal power. Formal power comes from a position: a supervisor, a commander, a manager, a leader. It is written down. It is official. Informal power is different. It comes from reputation, relationships, influence, fear, respect. Sometimes informal power is positive. An experienced employee may become someone others trust and follow. A mentor may influence younger workers in a healthy way. But informal power can become dangerous when it operates without accountability. The allegations surrounding banditos focused heavily on this issue. Were certain deputies simply respected because of their experience? Or did they hold influence that affected others unfairly? That distinction became central. Because the most difficult forms of power are not always visible. A person does not need an official title to influence decisions. They do not need to give direct orders to create pressure. Sometimes influence exists through reputation alone. A person may not say, "Do this." They may only create an environment where others understand what is expected. That invisible pressure can be powerful. For deputies who claimed they were targeted, this was part of their experience. They described a workplace where they believed certain people had the ability to shape their careers and relationships. They felt that refusing to participate in the culture carried consequences. Whether every accusation could be proven became a legal question. But the psychological question was broader. What happens inside an organization when employees believe some people are more powerful than the official system? The answer is often fear. Fear changes behavior. People become careful. They avoid conflict. They remain silent. They choose safety over honesty. This is why whistleblowers are often viewed as important in any organization. They interrupt silence. They force institutions to examine uncomfortable issues. But whistleblowers also face unique challenges. They often experience isolation. They may lose relationships. They may be accused of damaging the group they once belonged to. For deputies who spoke against the alleged banditos culture, this was part of their struggle. They were challenging a system they had joined. They were criticizing an institution they had chosen to serve. That creates an emotional conflict that outsiders may not fully understand. It is one thing to criticize a system from the outside. It is another thing to criticize the system you are part of. Because when you challenge your own organization, you are not only fighting others. You are fighting the possibility that something you believed in may have serious flaws. This psychological conflict is one of the most powerful aspects of the Bandito story. It is not simply about misconduct. It is about identity. The deputies involved were not just employees. They were people who built their lives around the badge. Their careers. Their friendships. their sense of purpose. When that identity becomes connected to controversy, the emotional consequences can be enormous. The Banditos case also raises a question about the difference between brotherhood and secrecy. Brotherhood is built on trust. But real trust requires honesty. A strong team should be able to confront problems. A strong organization should allow criticism. A strong institution should not fear questions. Because accountability is not the enemy of loyalty. True loyalty means wanting the organization to improve. It means protecting the mission, not protecting mistakes. This is why the controversy became so significant. It forced people to examine what loyalty really means. Is loyalty standing beside someone no matter what? Or is loyalty having the courage to tell someone when they are wrong? The answer has consequences far beyond the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Every organization faces similar challenges. Companies, schools, government agencies, military groups. Any place where people work together can develop internal cultures. The question is whether those cultures strengthen the mission or weaken it. The Banditos controversy became a warning about what can happen when unofficial systems grow stronger than official ones. When identity becomes more important than responsibility. When silence becomes easier than honesty. When protecting relationships becomes more important than protecting principles. But it also became a story about courage. Because every institution that improves does so because someone is willing to ask difficult questions. Someone is willing to challenge what others accept. Someone is willing to say, "This is not right." The legacy of the Banditos controversy is therefore not only about accusations and conflict. It is about the constant struggle between power and accountability. Between belonging and independence. Between loyalty and integrity. And perhaps the most important lesson is this. A badge does not make someone trustworthy. A position does not make someone honorable. A uniform does not remove human weakness. The strength of any institution depends on the people inside it, and whether those people are willing to hold each other accountable. Because the greatest threat to an organization is not always the enemy outside its walls. Sometimes, the greatest challenge comes from what grows quietly inside them.